Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today to talk about this incredibly important topic about leading with transparency. If you have not yet been to one of our webinars, we welcome you and thank you for joining. I'm Ashley Virtue from the National Conflict Resolution Center, and we started these webinars about a year and a half ago, really in response to a need that we were hearing from workplace leaders and employees all over the country who have been navigating new workplace challenges, kind of in this post-pandemic world where there have been a lot of new things that we're facing and having to figure out how to handle graciously and effectively within our teams while building positive culture. And so we've had amazing topics like overcoming political polarization in the workplace, how to create effective upstanders, trends in DE&I, and so many more. And so today's topic, leading with transparency, has really come out of a lot of conversations that we have been having with various employees, leaders, organizations, and companies of all different industries that have called us at NCRC to ask about the changing times and the deep, unfortunate division and polarization that we're seeing on our teams. And one of the things that we realized immediately is that, conflict resolution, whether being done at a very formal HR level or at that informal day-to-day, peer-to-peer level, conflict resolution is so closely intertwined with transparency. It's really something we know that, especially workplace leaders, those of us that think about conflict resolution, we're either the type of leader that acknowledges it is a part of our management, it is a part of what will happen in interpersonal relationships, and it can be dealt with effectively and even be an opportunity for growth and change. Or what I think a lot of us fall into, whether it's intentional or not, we avoid it. And when we avoid it, things don't come to the surface and things are not transparent the way that they should be. And as we've all learned, I'm sure, the hard way at different times in our careers, that usually leads to it coming to the surface somehow later on, and usually a worse scenario. So when we talk to workplace leaders, we talk about that ability to be transparent and to manage conflict, disagreements, differing points of view effectively, and really in an environment where everyone feels safe to bring a variety of thoughts to the table in a way that's productive for the team and the organization. So we're thrilled to have this topic here today. And I am so excited because joining me today is Mark Brun. I had the pleasure of meeting Mark at a conference last year and was immediately blown away by our just even initial conversation and then the continuing conversations that we had around how to empower and encourage leaders to have effective but sometimes difficult conversations on their teams. Mark himself is a very, very successful leader. He has run multiple companies and had an incredible corporate career. Through that, being coached and really being, I think, probably a student himself of what he's practicing now, receiving amazing coaching and development advice from other leaders he respected. And so as he stepped down from his role as president and CEO from an engineering and manufacturing company, which I will note something amazing about Mark is he didn't just step down, of course he had like this amazing succession plan and had coached someone to take over. So as he successfully kind of stepped down, he transitioned to this new area of passion for him, which is all about encouraging leaders, which is the name of his company. And in his own words, Mark, if you don't mind me quoting you, he says, "My life's purpose is encouraging leaders, breathing courage into them to become everything they were created to be." And so with that, we're just so thrilled to have Mark join us. And Mark, welcome to this webinar.
So glad to be here with you, Ashley.
So I'm going to dive right in because for our viewers, if you have attended before, you know that we commit to this being a half-hour webinar and we tackle enormous topics And we try to get to as much content as we can in 30 minutes because many of you are busy professionals who have other meetings to get to and different things going on in your day. So I am going to be just kind of having a conversation with Mark and asking him a few questions I think are relevant to the conversation, but we welcome questions from you as well. I am sure we won't have time to get to all of them because you are all thoughtful leaders and engaged individuals yourself. But I do want to let you know, whatever we can't get to today, we are already planning on a follow-up kind of write-up where we'll go back to Mark and kind of go through some of the questions that we may not get to today. So you can kind of have that in mind just in case we don't get to your question today. But please do put them in the Q&A and I will be keeping an eye on that as we go. All right. So Mark, I love to kind of start off with this quote, which is collaboration is a key part of the success of any organization, executed through a clearly defined vision and mission based on transparency and constant communication. And I feel like that really leads us from what we've talked about in the beginning into my first question for you. And so my first question for you, Mark, is when you think about your career, and you've had quite an amazing career, why has transparency mattered to your leadership style? And why do you think transparent leadership is important to leaders in 2024?
Yeah, I think it's always been important, but boy, oh boy, you mentioned how the ever-changing landscape continues to raise the stakes on leadership. I was lucky enough to have a great coach and mentor in my life. My first direct leader that I worked for after graduating from chemical engineering was a leader, Bruce Farble, and he led in an extremely transparent way. He would always lay the problem out in front of the team, and then the team would go out and work on it and collaborate together and go solve it. And so I almost didn't know there was another way to lead until I started working for a different leader, and they were not transparent. And so I was confused. I remember going to my dad, who's been a mentor in my life before, and he said, you can learn from either style of leader, good leaders or bad. You can learn what to do or what not to do. But I really saw the black and white difference in their leadership styles, and one approached problems openly with transparency, and one hid information, actually kept it to themselves and worked on the problem in hiding, and then would try to come out with a solution. And man, oh man, it was a complete 180. And so I learned that early. And then I've just watched it every step along the way. As you mentioned, stepping into Cambridge engineering, I got to lead there for 13 years. And there were so many items that were under the surface that there were two different groups. There were management and folks on the floor, and some information was hidden in the management side and wasn't approachable to the folks on the floor. And some folks on the floor would hide things from, and you're like, wait a minute, how do we bring these to the surface? And so we had to do that in a wise and effective manner over time. But the results on that business from that transparency, the growth, the business results, and the cultural growth, watching the people grow as they were able to solve those problems was phenomenal. So it's been every step along the 30-year journey.
Obviously, I think it sounds like transparent leadership came pretty natural to you. You had some amazing coaches. It's also just sounds like a big part of who you are as a person. I know for a lot of workplace leaders, because we talk to a lot of workplace leaders, when they are at least transparent with us, they share that the concept is actually quite scary. Both I think personally and also professionally for the organization.
Yeah.
So what do I think a lot of leaders associate the word transparency with vulnerability. And some of us really love the concept of vulnerability in leadership. I think others see it as potentially a spot for weakness. What do you think of that word vulnerability and how it relates to transparency in leadership?
Yeah, there's so much there to unpack. I mean, I think about growth and risk and how they are tied. So learning that there is risk when you bring things to the surface. And so acknowledging that the risk is there is important. If you want to grow as a leader, you actually need to actually take some risks. And so vulnerability is one way to look at risk. I think about, I love Brene Brown's work and how she has lifted that word to the point where people are speaking it in business.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that it's sometimes difficult for I don't want to say it's only gender related, but the male leaders to say, I want to become more vulnerable. If you're going out to address and attack a challenge, and if you're going out with a team, if you make the team more vulnerable, you can actually, it's risky. And so the idea that you want to make you don't want to make the organization more vulnerable, you want to make it stronger. And so I think about, one of the words that's helped me get over that hurdle is using the word courage, because it's uncomfortable to elevate things from hidden to transparent. It's uncomfortable. And growth is uncomfortable. And it takes courageous leadership. It takes courage to go against that comfort and to actually do it on purpose, to say, I'm going to step out of my comfort zone and do something on purpose, intentionally. It's going to make me uncomfortable. And elevate that to the point where we can all grow as leaders. I can grow and we can all grow. So I do choose courage as a word more than I use vulnerability as a word whenever I'm coaching leaders. It's why I call it encouraging leaders instead of invulnerability leaders. I don't
Might not get as many calls. Yeah.
I don't elevate their vulnerability, but it is risky to
Mhm.
actually step out of your comfort zone. So it's the same word, whatever works for the person, whatever works for the leader to help them be more transparent and authentic in their leadership works. And so I think that's how I'll share.
Yeah, and I think acknowledging the risk is an important piece when we work with organizations who are thinking about a conflict resolution process coming into the organization. Say something has happened, it's not just preventative training, but something has happened and we need to do a facilitated group dialogue or come in for mediation. There's often a tendency or a desire at first to kind of like, can we not call it that? Or, is it possible to not have to do this? And I think that is something we have to acknowledge, is that, yes, it's uncomfortable to acknowledge that the issue is present, but not acknowledging it certainly doesn't fix it and creates more issues down the road. And so the ability to go in, and it's only messy for a little while and then it's so much better, but you got to work through that mess a little bit to come out on the other end. And truly what we found, and what I know you and I have talked about, is you have stronger teams in the end, because when you go through something hard, you are a more cohesive team later.
Yeah, I think, there's a couple things there. You mentioned getting help from the outside. I think stepping into conflict sometimes, if it's deep conflict, if it's unresolved conflict, I know that I've made the mistake before of going alone. And so having people that have skills to actually help facilitate. The one question I always ask is, am I involved in the conflict, or is it some other conflict that's involved between two parties that I could help facilitate? And if I'm involved with it, I need help from the outside to be able to break it open and actually get me to own my part so that the organization can heal. I think the key is that when you go through a process like that, you're either going to get you're going to get stronger, or you're going to get weaker. What I found is with facilitation and good skilled conflict resolution, you get stronger. It's just, that's what happens. And so I think there's risk always in leadership. It's not a riskless job, but it's sometimes a lot riskier to leave it unknown and under the surface than it is to actually bring it to the surface and address it.
Thank you for that. As a side note, I got just 1 or 2 notes, but I think it's improved that your sound was a little bit low for some participants.
Yeah.
So I bet you have this amazing coaching voice. And I'm gonna say use your
talk a little bit louder.
TEDx voice. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do it. Is that better? Yeah. Can you hear me a little louder?
It sounds great to me. And some other people were letting me know that they were hearing you well. So I think that sounds great. Thank you.
Great.
All right. So I guess one of the things that we love to think about is how leaders embrace this idea of transparent leadership. And that goes hand in hand with courageous leadership, as you were saying.
Yeah.
What are some examples that you have seen or experienced of this courageous, transparent leadership?
Yeah. Well, I think, the areas, they can go across all sectors of the business. Safety is an interesting one. So safety in manufacturing is a really important topic. And basically your tracking of that and discussions about that. If you can elevate them to the point where you can bring near misses to the surface and actually lead transparently, it's an incredible boost to the culture. And so when I go into a culture and they're managing safety, if I see a safety chart and it's all green, I know there's a problem, because all green doesn't work. There has to be challenges, and I need to be able to see them up there. So it's one way to do a safety check on transparency is if you see some yellow and red on safety, you know that they're actually talking about those things. It's actually true on quality as well. If you've got quality metrics and if everything's green and everybody's satisfied all the time, you know there's a problem. So you're listening for small signals and them being able to be shared and openly discussed. And then you're listening to how that discussion happens and how they're resolved. It's the same with any other metrics, sales metrics, being able to see each region, each territory, each salesperson, and be able to see where they are at compared to target, and being able to discuss that openly. So those are some simple ones in the systems to build just a repetitive nature of being able to openly discuss issues and then resolve them. That leaves the harder ones. I don't know if you want to talk about those, but sometimes those are necessary too.
Well, that's a great transition actually into my next question. I think I know where you're headed with this because at the conference I mentioned last year that we connected at, one of the things that I heard you say in a conversation was around pay transparency. And we pay transparency is so I think intimidating as a topic that we even had a dedicated webinar just to pay transparency about a year ago, as a lot of laws were changing throughout the country. And
Yeah.
so, I think thinking about pay transparency goes hand in hand anytime we're having a conversation about organizational or leadership transparency. How have you found that with your own organization or companies you've worked with, leaders have effectively navigated that topic?
Yeah, I think it's a level 9 or level 10 issue, right? Because everybody cares about it. Even our extended family, my wife cares about my compensation. And so it's a place where we find a lot of our value. We feel valued or underappreciated for it. And so it's fraught with potential conflict. I think about, when you get it from the outside, somebody tells you have to open it up. And if you have not been leading transparently, built a culture where transparency is part of your leadership, it's going to be a huge jump from no transparency hidden to pay transparency. So what I've found the most effective is, first of all, start now. If you don't have that legal requirement, start now by opening up the items that are easier to deal with, that aren't quite as heavy conflict oriented than compensation. At some point in time, what I love is we were open compensation model at Cambridge, but it took time. And I had time early to be able to open up things that were easier to talk about, easier, less conflict associated. And so once we practiced that enough, once we got to pay transparency, it was like, yeah, of course, why wouldn't we share how we're compensating people? So I think about that. You're preparing and strengthening your own leadership and your team's capability to handle transparent communication and conflict. And then when you get to the point where you're strong enough, pay transparency is actually handleable. It's doable. And you can strengthen the organization through it instead of divide it and hurt it. I'm not in favor of forced pay transparency. So that's not where I'm coming from. I am in favor of leaders leading that and systematically building transparency so that they can provide growth opportunities for themselves and their leaders, and then get to the point where they can open up transparency there.
Well, I can imagine why you're not maybe in favor of forced pay transparency, because it's kind of the opposite of what we're talking about. It's not building a culture ahead of time that can handle that information and then throwing it out there without a structure that supports. Whereas if it's just always a normalized piece of your workplace and your culture, it almost doesn't matter if it's forced or not because it's there.
Correct. Yeah. So we can really damage businesses when we force things upon them that are regulatory in nature rather than inviting them to a higher level of leadership. And maturity on businesses, actually, we require them to mature over time. So it's important.
Yeah, and I think of so many of the important laws that have been imposed on businesses over many years, and they do help, force leaders to move into uncomfortable spaces that they may not want to otherwise. And I think that they're so critical to just moving us societally forward, and that happens in our workplaces. And I think though, for all of us that are tuning into this and thinking about this, we're called to something higher than that, which is to be ahead of that curve, to be thinking, way beyond the mandate, and thinking about what we can be doing so that a mandate just doesn't even ever matter. We're already way overly compliant with those things because we've got a team and a culture that believes in that.
Yeah, I mentioned the safety systems, safety regulatory compliance is so critical. But if you aim for compliance, you've got no chance. If you aim way above it, compliance doesn't matter and you never have to worry about OSHA coming in. So you've got to be able to aim your leadership way above the regulatory compliance areas that are coming.
Hmm. Okay, so this is kind of a fun question I've been dying to ask you. Are there times that you think transparent leadership is not appropriate? We've obviously talked about it a lot right now in this glowing context,
Yeah.
but I imagine there have to be times, we even say there are times that, confidentiality is important and conflict resolution, and there's just aspects of that. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think, oversharing, where you're basically trying to gain by manipulation or sharing something for your own gain instead of the growth of the organization, it happens. And so you end up needing wisdom on where to share and how to share. What I love is when I get triggered or whenever I see a CEO that I'm coaching, our team coaches every level of leader, but we basically are looking for areas where their concern is they've got some fear over uncovering something. And so then we get to look at that and decide how and who to bring into that so that they can get less and less afraid and deepen their understanding of what it would take to actually open it up all the way. So I think the key is wisdom doesn't happen overnight. You have to learn that one. I like having good, solid coaches and advisors with me and people that can speak into that because they've been there and done that. And they've got the scars from it. So I can learn from their scars instead of my own. That's one of our friend Gary Ridge's statements. He's like, I've got enough scars for the both of us. So you don't have to learn all of the things I've learned. And I think that's why I select people like that as my coaches. I just want to make sure that I've got good counsel on when to open it up.
Oh, that's so well said. Yes, enough scars for both of us. Not a goal we should all have, but something to share with people that we're helping coach. We got a great question that came in now in the Q&A. How do you get a team to participate productively? It seems the more transparency our organization tries to have, the more conflict and division it creates.
And so I think about that, you've got two questions in there. One is organization and one is team. I love whenever it's at the team level because you've got actually a team leader and then you've got a team around. And so being able to have the conversation and decide if I'm the one that's able to have that and facilitate it, or if I need outside facilitation to do it. With that, you can determine if it's growing in health because of it, you've got the right person with you helping facilitate. If it's not, then get a stronger facilitator or coach to be with you. And if you're doing it on your own and it's creating division instead of alignment, you need more help and support. You're not yet skilled enough at transparent leadership to do it alone. So get help.
Yeah, and I think what I might even add to that, kind of from our work side, is that sometimes I think you have to reality test with the team a bit as well. Going back to something we talked about earlier, it can be uncomfortable to deal with conflict, and you can acknowledge that up front. I know this isn't very comfortable right now. There's this kind of promise of it being better later on if we can work through this effectively together. But I think the reality testing part is also, what does it look like if we don't deal with this? I mean, where are we in a year? Where are we in 5 years? And so there's this opportunity right now for everyone to participate, to be part of this process as opposed to left out of it, and this goes unresolved and none of our work lives improve.
Yeah. If it's an unacceptable place for everybody to sit, But sometimes some people are happy with leaving it as is and some are not. And so that's the hard part. You're deciding as a leader whether you go in or not to step into the conversation. I would say if it's fear that's holding you back, get help and support and go after it. Because it's not an attractive leadership style to be afraid.
Mm. I think we have time for one more question from the audience. I love this one. What can individual employees do to create a more transparent workplace culture, or is it always top down?
Yeah, it's a great question. No, you can start wherever you're at. I think about relationships are built by sharing ourselves with other human beings and letting them share themselves with us. When we do it, we only control our side of it, and we can share at as deep of a level as we're willing to. It's riskier and riskier to share more and more of ourselves with others. Love and concern and leadership is actually not riskless. But we can share at as deep of a level as we are able to and willing to, and then they'll share where they can. Accepting that they're not going to move any further than they're comfortable and allowing them time and space to do that. But you can do that from any level of the organization. In any relationship you have, you can always share at the level that you're willing to, and you can always increase that level of sharing to more transparency. That's what I would share, is you can do that at any level of leadership.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think that's great. And what a thoughtful and important question for us to kind of start our conclusion with. And so I just again want to thank you all so much for the thoughtful questions you have asked. And I would also encourage you to keep putting them in the Q&A if you do have a great question, because like I said, we're going to have a little follow-up with Mark and get to some of these that we didn't get to and do a write-up, and you'll be receiving that. If you're on our list, you'll be receiving that in the coming weeks. So don't stop asking these amazing questions, and I'm seeing them come in right now, and I wish we had hours. I do just want to leave you with a couple of resources. The first of which is that, for those of you who have found that you're navigating this question or any of the topics that we mentioned, conflict resolution, the polarized workplace, trends in DE&I, there is a certificate program that the National Conflict Resolution Center has developed that specifically walks through these topics and really gives you some practical skill building around how to navigate these conversations, whether they are at the leadership level, with your team, with your frontline staff, with your mid-level managers. You might be a mid-level manager. It is such an empowering, effective, amazing program. And so I encourage you to look into it if you're at all interested in kind of taking this to the next level in terms of your own skill building. And like Mark said early on, we know that 2024 is going to bring its share of challenges, but there's a lot of opportunity out there to take a certificate program like this, work with amazing coaches like Mark to just help support the work that you're doing. And again, just to kind of make it really easy for everyone, if you are interested in anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can email me. There's my email. You can also scan this QR code and you'll be directed to a page on the website that has a lot more information and resources. And also my colleague, Allison, many of you have worked with her leading up to this webinar. She's been helping get all the logistics set. Her email's up there too. She's an amazing resource, and you can reach out to her to be put in contact with either of us. So with that, I just want to, again, respect everyone's time, but I want to thank Mark so much for his time today. I don't think it's the last time we will collaborate. We have so many areas of crossover in our work.
Great to be with you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.